Maverick News presents The Rick Walker Show. Defrag your mind.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Rick Walker. Welcome back to the Maverick News Channel. Great to have everyone back, especially the Maverick family, and especially all of our new viewers from all over the globe. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a lot of ground to cover, a lot to talk about. Donald Trump, of course, making his appearance in court, pleading not guilty at his arraignment, facing 34 different felony charges. We'll get into that. It's been a day of watching and waiting and waiting and watching as Trump drives around, gets out of his vehicle, walks into a building, walks into a room, wait around, walks out of the room, and then a lot of chatter, a lot of political punditry. So there's all of that. Also later tonight, we're going to interview Rhonda Jubinville, who has been on this program a few times. It's sort of a local story for me, but it's a local story with international significance because she is trying to make a change in the way that flags are flown at her municipal, in front of her city hall. And it's this same issue that really faces municipalities across Canada and the US. They all do it. They fly these special flags. I'll explain it all. Well, I'll let Rhonda explain it when she comes on in a little while. She's looking for fairness. And she kind of wants to do away with the practice because ultimately she feels there is no fairness. There's no way to completely be fair, and that things aren't fair in the way that they fly special flags for special groups at special times. So we'll get into some of that too. What else do we have for you tonight? The mayor of Calgary left speechless after Cian Bexte from the Counter Signal asked a pretty straightforward question that the mayor really had, I guess, no answer for. Cat got her tongue. All that while Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced additional funding for police services in order to put people's minds at ease in the wake of increasing violence. And we just saw just yesterday, we talked about that stabbing spree with 4 people being stabbed. So we'll dig into that as well. But we have a very special feature interview tonight with Julie Tanny. Her father was involved in the MK Ultra mind control experiments that took place in Montreal back in the 1950s and the 1960s. In fact, those experiments went on all the way up until 1973. And they're so bizarre, so horrific, that a lot of people today still think that it's a conspiracy theory, but it's something that actually did happen, funded by the CIA. And now there is a proposed class action lawsuit that people are trying to push through the courts, but the US government is looking for immunity. We'll get the full explanation from Julie when she joins us right after this. Don't go away.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching. Maverick News. Fighting for freedom.
Joining us now is Julie Tanney. Hello, Julie. Thank you for joining us on the program tonight. It's a privilege.
Hi, Rick. Thank you for having me.
This is one of the strangest stories, I think, in Canadian and U.S. history. It's one of the strangest stories I've ever heard. For a long time, I thought it was a conspiracy theory, but it's very, very real. The MK Ultra mind control experiments funded by, directed by the CIA, and it has a Canadian connection that I think most Canadians are probably not aware of. Can you tell people when this whole thing got started and what your connection is to it?
Well, there's different philosophies about when it started. When the Allen opened in 1943, people believe that he started experimenting right away.
So when you say the Allen, that is the
Allen
Allen Memorial Institute in
Right.
Montreal.
That's right.
Okay.
When it opened, it was Dr. Cameron was the director. And I don't
That's
know.
Dr. Ewan Cameron?
Right.
Yes. Okay.
I don't think he was doing brainwashing experiments, but he was doing experimental medicine. So a lot of people got harmed. But the brainwashing experiments did not start with the CIA. The brainwashing experiments allegedly started with the Canadian government earlier than 1957 to 64, which is when the CIA came in. But I believe the CIA came in because of what the government of Canada was already doing, the Department of Defense. So, that's why the CIA is not the only group that we're suing. We're suing the government. We're suing McGill for starting this because it started in the psychology department under Donald Hebb at McGill University.
I see.
So there are a lot of components.
And I guess at that time, there was a lot of interest among national security officials and government on psychological warfare because they were convinced at that time, I guess, that the Soviets were engaging in these kinds of experiments. And even during the, especially the Korean War,
Exactly,
as
yes.
I understand, they thought they had sort of mastered this and that they needed to catch up. It was
Right.
sort of a Cold War thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My father had a pain in his face, and how he landed up as a major guinea pig in this experimental thing, we don't know. But my father had a pain in the side of his face, something like trigeminal neuralgia, or TMJ as they call it, where it's a pain in the temple that radiates into the jaw, and it's supposedly excruciating. I remember as a little girl seeing my father chewing on ice cubes all the time to try to alleviate the pain, and he went to several hospitals to try and get some relief, but they didn't know how to fix it. At the time, they thought it was psychosomatic. It was all in his head. So they sent him to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist put him into this program. And the psychiatrist happened to have been working with Ewan Cameron. So he knew exactly what he was doing with my father. I only wish he was still alive.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a real conspiracy.
Yes.
It was really, I've read many records, and I've seen, a lot of drugs that they gave and a lot of shock treatments. But one thing that was different in my father's case was that they talked about, let me start by saying that when he came into the hospital, they immediately put him into an insulin coma. And we saw insulin in the charts on day one, and we were like, why? My father wasn't diabetic. But they put him into this sleep room and ran a tape recorder under his pillow. I'd love to know what was on it, but there's no way of finding that out. Some people do know. We have no idea what was on my father's tapes. But after 30 days, they felt that he still had ties to his former life by asking to see his wife, which is very ominous. I mean, what were they trying to accomplish? So they put him back in the sleep room for another 30 days. And after the 30 days, they marked in the files that it looks like this is as far as we can take him. Where they wanted to take him, I don't know. There's a lot of talk that Lee Harvey Oswald was treated at the Allen Memorial. There's talk that, what's his name? Can't think of his name. The one who was convicted of murdering Martin Luther King.
Oh, Sirhan.
No, that's Robert
Sorry.
Kennedy. Yeah, I can't think of what his name is at the moment, but he was friends with Lee Harvey Oswald, apparently. And apparently these guys were all treated at the Allen. I don't know if it's true. I've read that Sirhan said that he remembered walking into the Ambassador Hotel and doesn't remember anything after that.
Right.
So if it's some kind of brainwashing, I don't know. But this took place, I mean, it was all over the world.
You're talking about James Earl Ray.
That's it, James Earl Ray.
Right.
Yeah. And but it's amazing how many universities and how many hospitals around the world were involved in this brainwashing.
And so
there's a list of eight colleges in the States. There's at least 8 hospitals just in the Montreal area alone and across Canada. I've gotten letters from people who've been through this program in England and in Denmark and everywhere.
So what they would do is they would use different drugs, and LSD was one of the most prominent,
Right.
or at least one of the ones that they talk about the most.
Right.
And
yeah. I don't know that my father had that.
Mhm.
I know other people have.
And they would put them into extended sleep modes, right?
That's
like
right.
20, 30 days in a stretch where they would just keep them asleep.
Right. Well, they would wake them for 1 hour. He was asleep for 23 out of 24 hours a day. The 1 hour was to eat and to go to the bathroom, but that was it. It was 23 out of 24 hours a day for 2 months.
And then during that sleep time, they would administer shock therapy at fairly high voltages.
Well, there were 2 different kinds of shock treatments. Well, the regular kind of shock treatments and one that was designed by a Mr. Page and a Mr. Russell. And these Page Russell shock treatments were 40 to 75 times the strength of a normal shock treatment. And that's what my father had. It was designed to wipe out the memory completely. And for what I'm told, these shock treatments went on 24/7.
Unbelievable. And then while they were doing this, they would often run recorded messages while people were asleep so that they're filling your head full of whatever it is that they want to fill your head full of.
That's what they call psychic driving. That was called psychic driving. That's what my father had. And sorry, go ahead.
How long was your father in there?
He was only in there for 2.5 months. It was enough to ruin his life. You know, there were reports that have come out since that these Page Russell shock treatments cause cardiac problems. And interestingly enough, my father had 2 massive heart attacks and a massive stroke at 60 that left him completely incapacitated and unable to communicate. And he lived like that for 18 years, unable to read, write, or speak. So, you know, he never had a normal life after that.
He couldn't speak.
No.
And when he went in, he obviously could.
Well, when he went in, he was, listen, this was a man who was very devoted to his children. At the time that it happened, my brother was 10, my sister was 7, and I was 5. We were with my father every single weekend doing things, whether it was going fishing or Belmont Park or wherever it was. He built a skating rink. He was always busy with us every single weekend. And when he came home, it just vanished. He didn't even know us. He remembered, I believe he remembered my mother, but he really didn't even remember he had children or had a business. And he came back extremely distant, and that never changed. Yeah, he never went back to the man he was. So I'm sure it was hell for my mother.
Yes, and for you.
Yes, it was very difficult, very, very difficult. It was, I know that, you know, it's funny, we talk about these experiments, people just don't talk about it. And we never talked about it. And even when it came out in the news that Mrs. Orlico was suing the CIA in 1978, we still didn't talk about it. No, I remember my mother saying to my brother when it came on the news, call up the Royal Victoria in the morning and get Dad's records. But we never ever discussed it. You just didn't talk about it. So we were doing an interview, my brother and I, and the journalist asked my brother what his home was like growing up, and listening to my brother describe it was such a shock, because, like I said, we never shared those feelings. We never shared what happened to my father, but he was very close with my father. CFL tickets and Canadians tickets, and they did so much together. And my father had zero interest when he came home. So that whole relationship dissolved. It was really very tough. And it was very sad to hear my brother describe it the way he did, because we had never had that conversation.
What about you? What was it like for you?
Well, my father became physically violent with me. Not the other two, just me. Don't know why. It was a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. I know that my mother was very depressed. You have a husband who doesn't know anything, his business, his children. How do you cope? And I guess maybe it would have been a little different had we understood what was going on. But like I said, people didn't talk. So your father just came home a different person. And I think that children tend to blame themselves, what did I do wrong? But it was very tough. It was very, very tough.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people in the class, and they often talk about their experiences and their horror stories. And every single story is the same, that they came home angry and violent, distant, just horror stories, really.
It really is a horror story.
Yeah, it really is. And when we first decided to file the suit and we talked to different people about it, they looked at me like I was crazy. I must be some kind of conspiracy nutcase because that story can't possibly be true. But it really was. It's really, I never thought for a moment that I grew up in the same kind of house as anybody else, but my story is very sad. There are other stories of people jumping off buildings and off bridges and seeing your loved ones commit suicide. Just, I never professed to have the worst story, believe me, but there are some terrible, terrible stories.
Is there any way of knowing how many people were subjected to all of this?
They won't give us that information. The only thing we know is that in 1992, when they had what was called the trying to think of what it was called. They had a program in 92 that was introduced by Mulroney to pay victims $100,000. Now, you had to be reduced to a childlike state, which my father was. He wore a diaper and giggled like a 4-year-old. And you had to still be alive. Now, that was a catch, because this happened in the 40s and 50s. By the time you got to 1992, most people weren't alive anymore. My father was really on his last breath. And, my mother got the payment. But after so many years of taking care of a man who was paralyzed and couldn't communicate, and it cost my mother over $2 million to have people help to take care of him, because she had to go back to work and run his business so that she could support the family. And what was $100,000 compared to what it cost?
Right.
And what, for many people, they targeted a lot of women who had postpartum depression. And I don't think they understood that it was hormonal and it wasn't psychological. And they used a lot of women who had postpartum depression. And the thing is that when you take a woman who has just had children and you do brainwashing experiments, she comes home and she can't take care of her children. So father has to either stop working to care for his kids or find the money to pay for help, because the mother certainly can't look after the children. It was a financial nightmare for all the families involved. And really, everybody should get some kind of compensation for what they went through. There are so many people who went into foster care sexual abuse. I mean, just, it just gets worse and worse and worse. But, people say to me, well, won't an apology do it? And I say, no. First of all, politicians today don't know much about it. They don't really care about it. And it wasn't them who did it. But for many of these families, the opportunity, a lot of opportunities were lost because of financial problems due to mothers being incapacitated. And in my case, my father.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, there were
And-
men, but there was it was a majority of women.
And I would imagine when someone was left in that condition and then they were released back out into the public would just look at them like they were just crazy people.
Yes, and the funny thing is, my father didn't have psychological problems, and there were a lot of people there really didn't have anything wrong with them. A hormonal depression after having a child is perfectly normal. I know someone in our group, her father was an alcoholic. He wasn't nuts. He wasn't sick
Yes.
emotionally. He wasn't, granted, I'm sure there were people who were not well and had mental health issues, but I believe a great majority of them did not.
So the CIA funded these experiments.
Right.
A lot of it was done in Montreal, in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's this proposed class action lawsuit, which went to court before, and there was you filed the paperwork on this before the pandemic, and then there was a big delay. Can you kind of give us
That's
the
right.
timeline on what's been going on with
Okay,
the legal battle?
we had a meeting. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Allison Steele was a woman who got compensated with the $100,000, and this was in November 2017. And even though they made her sign a non-disclosure agreement, she went on TV and talked about it. And when people heard about it, I think it was on the Fifth Estate, they called in, and one thing led to another, word of mouth, and we landed up forming an email chain. And then we decided on a Facebook private group. And we got a lot of people coming forward, and we decided to hold a meeting, and people came in from all over the country. That was May 2018. And at that meeting, a lawyer was brought in by somebody else, and the people in the group really did not want this lawyer. So some of them stayed with him, but I'd say 92% stayed with the group that I had formed, and along with a couple of other people who worked with me, Marlene Levinson and Angela Bardosh. And we worked until we could find a lawyer. And we finally found a lawyer in July 2018. And we worked with them and begged and pleaded until we finally filed in January 2019, which was just before the lockdown. And the courts were closed for 3 years. So I don't know the reason for it, but Judge Morrison, who was overseeing our case, decided to step down. And our lawyers felt that we had gone for a hearing against the Attorney General of the United States. Our lawyers were very unhappy with his decision. They felt it was very rushed. And they're feeling very positive about this appeal.
So there was a decision that came down in August, right, where the U.S. government was looking. They say they should have immunity from prosecution in Canada because if you want to sue them, they say you should be suing them in the United States. What's your position on that?
Well, I'll tell you, you had to be there. Well, we did it on Zoom, but you really missed an opportunity not hearing them perform. There are two lawyers, and it's Consumer Law Group, CLG, and the founder is Jeff Ornstein, and his partner is Andrea Grass. And Andrea and him are an amazing team. They did a presentation that we were euphoric after. It was brilliant. And most of it was the premise that you can't say that as the government you want immunity when you never came in as the government. They came in secretly as the Society for Human Ecology. They did not come into Canada as the US government. So you can't come in and say, we're going to sneak around and do this and pay off somebody to do brainwashing experiments. And then when you get caught, say, well, wait a minute, we're the US government. It doesn't work that way. And but there are other things about it being a commercial enterprise that they engaged in, a private payment. It wasn't like government to government. And it was a real honor to watch them at work, because they are just amazing. CLG is the lawyers that did the Lac-Megantic settlement. You remember when the train exploded?
Yes, vaguely.
So-
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, terrible incident.
Yes.
But they managed to secure the largest settlement in Canadian history. And I do note that if it was 2020 or 2019, they were named the class action firm best in Canada. So they're really, we're very, very lucky to have these guys.
So if I
doing
understand
this
it
for
correctly,
us.
there was a decision in August that, am I correct, that went in favor of the US government? But
Yes,
this is being appealed, and that's why you were in court just days ago, about what,
that's
4 or
right.
5 days ago, right?
Yeah, so this was the appeal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so where does that
And,
stand?
it's-
Where are you at in the process with the appeal?
We're in the waiting phase now, waiting for a decision. We're extremely optimistic just by the questions that were asked. We feel very positive about it, but we believe it'll probably go to the Supreme Court. I don't think if we win or lose, I think it'll go to the Supreme Court.
Well, if the US government were to win, is there any way that you even could go to the US and sue when you're a Canadian citizen and have any hope of success? Because I mean, I'm not a legal expert, especially when it comes to US law, but as a Canadian going into the United States, I'm not sure that you would even have the same rights, if any.
Well, the bottom line is not whether we could sue in the States. The real statement out of all this is, why is the Canadian government not protecting us?
Right.
And in the 70s, when Velma Orlico sued, her husband was a member of parliament from Winnipeg. When she sued the CIA, the Canadian government actually stepped in to try to help the US to beat them. And they certainly aren't helping now either. And I think it's just terrible that they're not helping their own.
Wow.
They really are not. As a matter of fact, I think they would do anything to help the US. And I just don't understand it. I really don't. Now, we don't know whether the government knew the CIA had come in. I mean, I'm sure they did, because all the flight logs, it's a very long, complicated story, but there's flight logs of people that came in from the CIA to Canada. Nothing is listed anywhere. So somebody had to know.
Ugh,
There's
there's no way they were doing something that extensive and for that long without the federal
Yes.
government in Canada knowing.
Yeah.
Of course they knew.
Well, there was a man writing a book about who was the guy who killed Martin Luther King? James Earl
Ray, yes.
Right. He was writing a book on James Earl Ray, and he read something about McGill University and brainwashing experiments. And I was on the McGill site, and I saw him asking, can someone tell me what the brainwashing experiments at McGill are all about? So I contacted him, and he sent me some interviews that he did. He interviewed an assassin who worked for the CIA and the mob, and he went to prison for 30 years for murder. And when he came out, as soon as he came out, he interviewed him, and he shows me on the film that he puts a microphone on the desk, and it doesn't even say a word to the guy yet. And the first thing the man says is, I can't talk about the brainwashing, it's classified. And he didn't even ask him McGill had never come into it. But this guy later gave a second interview, because I asked him, there's so many questions that you could have asked him that you didn't ask. And he asked him different things. And he said that the CIA considered the Allen Memorial to be their training center. I found it fascinating. So it was really a large scale project. It wasn't just a few random people, being used for brainwashing. I mean, this was large scale.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Dr. Ewan Cameron, didn't he actually testify at the Nuremberg trials?
He was there to decide whether Hess was sane to stand trial or not.
Right.
While he was there, he helped write the Nuremberg Code. The first item on the Nuremberg Code is you can't do anything to a patient without informed consent.
Right.
And after that was done, he came back to Montreal and continued to do experiments without patient consent.
And horrific experiments.
Well, this man had a huge ego. I mean, he named himself World Psychiatric President, President of the Canadian Psychiatric Center, the World Psychiatric Organization. I mean, he could have done, he could have named himself President of an interplanetary committee if there was one. He had a huge ego, huge. And he didn't care about anything or anybody. It was just about his ego.
So my assessment based on all of this is that the whole thing was really run by a maniac.
Yes. Well, it all started with Sid Gottlieb, who was a man who worked for the CIA, and he was nuts. He was real crazy. He lived in a house without running water or electricity. I mean, it's a really crazy story. But if you ever want to read something, it's Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. He was the founder. He was the founder. They would go to discotheques in Europe and drop LSD into people's drinks and leave. Like, no rhyme or reason for any of it. I mean, if you want to test people with LSD, at least stick around to see the results. But no, just dropped it in their drinks and left. There was a meeting in Montreal, July 1st, 1950, with members of the Canadian Department of Defense and members of the British military. And they ran an identical program concurrent with the Montreal program. And they did the exact same thing to people there. I don't know if they ever sued. I should look into it, but I don't know that they ever did. But it was everywhere. I mean, the more you read, the more amazing it is.
The more horrific it is.
Yes.
What's the ultimate, what are you suing for? What are you hoping for in terms of settlement?
Well, the way it works in a class action, you don't ask for a specific amount. Normally, if they lose and we get certified to go to court, it's very rare that you go to court. My lawyers have told us that it's really a very, very small percentage of cases actually go to court, because they know if they lost and we got certified, then they would lose in court. So they make an offer. What that offer is, I have no idea. But I really hope that every single person in that group gets an apology and compensation for what they went through. There's a lot of people, and I know that there are a lot more that haven't come forward yet, because they still can't talk about it.
It's been so long.
Yeah. Yes.
So long.
Yeah. And there's more people that sign on to this lawsuit every day. I mean, there are so many people, it's mind-boggling. And if they would give us a list of patients, we could do something, but they won't. And they're making it very hard to get records.
Is there any legal action that can be taken on that front?
Well, I know that my lawyers have filed paperwork that they can't destroy any of the records. As far as we know, the records are all intact. Why they never destroyed them, I don't know. To have kept them so long is kind of strange, but we believe that they're all intact.
And there were a lot of doctors that were involved in this, a lot of people.
Well, it was systemic. It was everybody from Ewan Cameron down to the orderlies. It wasn't just him. It was the entire system. If you didn't follow along, you weren't going to get your degree. And we have nurses that have come forward who said that what went on in there was just absolutely horrific. We have people who were patients who were raped. We have patients who were dragged naked down to the sleep room. It's horrific.
I can't. It's so hard to wrap my head around this, to think that this was going on in Canada.
Well, it's a really strange thing because I just heard that we have Chinese police departments in Canada. So I guess anything is possible.
Well, they locked us all down too.
Yes.
Uh,
My next door neighbor jumped
Yeah.
during that lockdown. It was an absolutely horrendous experience because I heard it happen. And it was just very, very sad. But this lockdown didn't do anybody any good. Really.
no.
No.
In fact, it changed the country. I think it changed the people.
Oh,
The
yes,
last 3
without a
years has
doubt.
changed everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's changed opinions. It's changed a way of life. It's changed people's feelings towards government, especially big pharma.
Mhm.
I think it's made us all a little paranoid.
A lot paranoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you have a prime minister who says that if you didn't take the vaccine, then you're probably racist and a misogynist and you're this and you're that. I mean, that's not helping anybody. So when you think about it, not much has changed in Canada.
Yeah. When I
They're
say
very secretive.
maybe my assessment is wrong when I say I'd no longer recognize my country. Maybe it's just that I was never seeing it for what it was before.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I can only speak for my father. Um, you took a man who opened a one-man business and started seeing a great success. And I know that he probably had a lot of stress, raising three children and a one-man business, and I'm sure it was very stressful, and maybe that was the cause of his pain in his face. But what kind of government takes a man who has facial pain and turns him into a shell of a human being, and then, two heart attacks and a stroke, and what a life for all of us. Terrible.
And through all these experiments, from what I'm seeing, there was never any positive outcome
Oh
to
no.
to
Total
to to justify anything.
total failure.
Yeah.
Total failure. Yeah, total failure. And we believe that's why he was fired in 1964. But then there was a doctor, Peter Roper, who continued it, and then he was fired and he fought it and he lost. So I guess they really realized just how much damage it had done, but they never saw an ounce of success anywhere in those years. I mean, this went on for I don't know, 16, 17 years. This was still going on, and probably even more than that, because it probably started before 1950. And they never saw one person be cured, not one. So I don't know what they were thinking. I really don't know. But it wasn't just brainwashing. I believe that big pharma used them for experiments with drugs. We have some people who were quite young at the time, like 15, 16 years old, who were at the Allen, and they weren't given brainwashing treatments and shock treatments. They were given huge doses of different kind of drugs, as to see, I guess, for testing. They just, I don't know why they thought that these people weren't important enough, or they didn't have enough value, because they weren't, and even if they were crazy, who does that? But they weren't crazy. That was the thing. They really weren't. First of all, one of the things you have to look at is this was in the days of pre-Medicare. So you had to have money to go to the Allen.
Yeah.
They targeted groups of people that had money. So you're not talking about homeless people that they shoved into a mental hospital. You're talking about upstanding, normal, everyday families having children, going about their business. And they have a child, they get depressed from hormones, and next thing you know, they're vegetables. It was like an assembly line. They went from the Allen, they went into the Douglas. They sort of like tore them to shreds and then just sort of discarded them at the Douglas. So like no regard for human life, zero. But here we go again with the government not looking after their own.
Yes.
And that's a terrible thing with Canada.
Is there any indication that they ever did anything with the results of this? Were there military applications, do you think, that came out of this?
I don't know, because the groups that the groups that they tested weren't really, how can I explain it? They weren't really sick people. I don't know what they expected to get out of it. I really don't. I don't know what the Department of Defense was looking for. I don't think they ever got anything, any kind of relevant information, because there really wasn't anything relevant to tell them. There was no kind of a success. And after, I think it was in 1964 that he finally admitted, Ewan Cameron, that it was a complete failure. We even have someone in our group who spoke to his son, Duncan, because we wanted him to assist in our case. And the children of his children actually discussed it and decided against it, unfortunately. But that would have been amazing for our case. Would have been just amazing.
To me, it seems like this is much more than just a class action lawsuit. People should be held accountable for this, but is there even
Absolutely.
anybody around at this point to be held accountable, or are they all gone?
Well, they're all gone. There are some hospital employees, like nurses and that, the orderlies, that are still around, but the doctors are all gone. There's really nobody to really get to hold accountable. But I believe that today's government, should recognize the fact that Canada has to look after their own. And this is not this is not a case of it happened and it's over. Transgenerational trauma is very real.
Mhm.
And I believe that the children of these victims never saw their true potential, whether it be because of financial problems or trauma that stopped them from doing what they could have done. But I believe that and listen, it affected my kids, it affects other people's children, it goes from generation to generation, because the trauma was so great. I know one family that the woman jumped off Place Ville Marie. I mean, can you imagine? And just horrible. So this is not something that just happens and it goes away and the next generation forgets all about it. It doesn't happen like that. It goes from generation to generation.
Well, I'm not sure how you might comment on this, but when I look today at the way people are manipulated, in my opinion, by
Mhm.
what they're watching on social media and television, through the media in general, the propaganda, the sophistication of it, uh, the types of messaging through, I would classify it as information warfare, much of it directed
Mhm.
at, you know, the government's own citizens. Um, I wonder if these experiments actually didn't continue on after they said that they stopped, or additional or different kinds of mind control experiments, and
I
probably it's
think that
still
it
going
goes
on.
on. I'm sure it does. I get dozens and dozens and dozens of letters from people who believe they are victims of mind control. I don't know if they're for real, legitimate. I don't know. It would surprise me if there isn't some kind of experimentation going on.
Yes.
I think you're absolutely right, especially in the midst of Bill C-11 being passed, that everything we read is controlled, and it will be controlled even more, which makes me quite sick to think about it. And I asked our member of parliament about it, and he said it doesn't infringe on your free speech. I said, I didn't say it infringes on my free speech. It infringes on my freedom. That's right. Yeah. I said, how can you support a bill like that? Like, really? I mean, but this is the same mentality of government that was around in the 50s. It's the same thing. I don't see any difference.
I think it's worse than that. I think it's the same kind of mentality that we saw in Nazi Germany with the kinds of experiments that were taking place then.
Yes. Well, do you know that I've read that after the concentration camps were liberated, they brought to Canada and the United States 1,054 doctors from Germany. While the world is looking for war criminals, they're all here working. I have pictures of Mengele working in Montreal and in Quebec City. Mengele. Okay. And the whole world is looking for war criminals, and they're all here by invitation.
Yes.
I believe that the US helped Germany in some ways, maybe selling them arms. I don't know. I mean, but the world is a very complicated place, especially with the politics. And today it's no different. I think we have the world's worst prime minister ever to lead a country. I think the man is as dumb as a brick. And it makes me sick to think that this is going on, where he shut down all discussion about C11. I mean, this is not a democracy anymore, and it's very sad. But it wasn't a democracy when they did this to my father either.
Right.
Here's a man who went for help, and look what they did to him.
Unbelievable. I just, I'm so grateful for you sharing this story. It must be frustrating for you, because I'm sure that if you even do try to talk to anybody about this, I would imagine most people just look at you like you have three heads.
Yes, but even the people who do know that it happened, like people in my family, because there's some people in my family that are lawyers, they really felt that it was a mistake to follow this through. We'd never win. But I can't say I was always optimistic, but I am now, because of the caliber of the legal team that we have. And the funny thing is that they have compensated every single class action suit that has come by. Kadir got $10.5 million. The other guys that went to fight for ISIS and came back got $10.5 million. The Duplessis orphans have been paid. Everybody has been paid. The residential schools, everybody. He refuses to acknowledge this suit. And the ridiculous part is that his mother was a victim. She was treated by Brian Mulroney's father-in-law at the Allen, who worked with you and Cameron, and given LSD. His name was Dr. Pivnicki, and he was Mila's father. And he treated Justin's mother.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
I understand that.
His inability to acknowledge this suit is quite shocking.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, we have to just keep our fingers crossed that the judges we are in front of are not controlled by Justin Trudeau.
So, any indication how long you'll need to wait before you get a decision?
My feeling is the sooner it happens, the better for us. We were very positive, feeling very, very positive in the courtroom, but then, they take their time and they reflect and they think, and something could change. So sooner the better, I think. But there's no way to know. It could be 6 months. It could be less.
And the fact that it's taken this long, that you're still in this legal battle, it says to me that this could easily happen again.
Oh, absolutely. In Canada, anybody can walk into this country and use people here for whatever they want. And I have to admit that I am shocked by any government that instated full immunity to another country. I don't get it. You can have somebody, the son of an ambassador, come in here and kill somebody, and he goes home scot-free. And there's something wrong with that. Something wrong with that. And
Yes.
to have these people come in disguise and then suddenly claim immunity when they never came in as the Attorney General of the United States. They came in as the Society of Human Ecology, some, shell of an organization. And yet they can claim full immunity, and I don't get it. And hopefully they won't get away with it. But it is
Well,
frustrating.
That's because they're claiming international sovereignty and therefore immunity under international law,
Right.
like diplomatic immunity, essentially, right?
Well, yes, but at some point it changed to the immunity, I'm trying to think of what the word is. It could be retrospective. Retroactive. You can go back. For some reason, Canadians didn't write it exactly the same way. And because of that one line that's written differently, they're arguing that you can't go back. So, there's a few legal arguments. It's about going back. It's about it being a commercial enterprise. And what was the first one? The first one was about them not coming in as the government. So we shall see. We had the judges at the appeal court were excellent. This judge, Justice Stephen Hamilton, was amazing. He's brilliant. And we shall see. We have our fingers crossed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, is there anything else you think I might be missing?
Well, no, I think that if anybody's hearing this broadcast that is a possible class member, that they should come forward. It's difficult. There are so many I know that really have not been able to take that step and deal with the past. It's really, it's amazing how many people there are that can't. I want to thank you very much for giving me this time to talk about it, because it's something we have to work hard at keeping relevant and in the news, because we don't want people to forget about it. And I want to really thank you for that.
Well, I thank you for sharing the story. I know that there's a lot of pain there.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, I'm really appreciative of it, because hopefully by sharing the information, we make people aware. And well, right now, I think it could happen again very easily. Maybe just public awareness would help to prevent something like this from being repeated.
Right.
And I sure hope that you guys get some sort of compensation, because you're absolutely right. The pain, the suffering, it didn't end with your father passing away. It's all through your family and all through the other families.
Yeah. And one very sad note is that my brother just dropped dead at the end of May this year. And he had a law degree. So he was very in tune with the lawsuit. He read their briefings, and he thought these lawyers were unbelievable, amazing, and talented. And unfortunately, he's not going to see the end result. But we'll keep hoping for him.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Julie, thank you very much for joining us on the program tonight. Folks,
thank you.
Julie Tanney. Don't go away, folks. We will be right back, and the show will continue. We'll get into the news of the day, and then our other guest, Rhonda Jubinville, will be along around 8 o'clock. So we'll look forward to that as well. And again, Julie, thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Well, it's been an incredible day. That was an incredible story from Julie Tanny and the MK Ultra mind control experiments and the lawsuit here in Canada. But it's been an amazing day in the United States where Donald Trump entered a not guilty plea today. It's been a day of waiting around. We used to call it hurry up and wait when I was on stakeouts like that. And that's exactly what it was today. Media stakeout, all for the quick shot of the president or former president walking into a building, walking out of a building, walking into a room, walking out of a room. There was a lot of that. This is what it looked like in New York.
President Trump, will you please come take some questions? How did you plead, President Trump? How did you plead?
That's him walking out of the building.
Everyone is to stay put so we can go back now.
And for days, we've been hearing from political pundits who are saying, well, we're going to show up with cameras and then we're going to take pictures of him getting out of his vehicle and walking into a building. And then we're going to wait around until he exits the building and gets back into his vehicle. And here's President Trump exiting the building now. Not to make light of it, but that's really kind of the way it's been all day. It's strange. You know what this reminded me of, or what to me, all of this had the feel of the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase. Watching the video of the president's motorcade, that's to me what it felt like. It wasn't the same. It was sort of like the inversion of that, where they were chasing OJ, but now this was Trump going to be arrested instead of running away from trying to be arrested. It's just so weird. And I think it's so damaging for the country. Unbelievably damaging. The United States will never be the same again. Nor will Canada, for that matter, the world. Today changed the world. Talk about division. This is just going to get worse as we get closer and closer and closer to the election. And I don't know if Trump will end up being the nominee or not. My guess is he will be. But man, You want to get people upset. Well, you just did it. Didn't you? Yes, you did. And who did it? The district attorney, who held a news conference after Trump's arraignment in court. Here he is, Alvin Bragg.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they plan to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described and that which was charged by the grand jury is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world. That is why we have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white-collar crime. My office, including the talented prosecutors you saw at arraignment earlier today, has charged hundreds of felony falsifying business records. This charge, it can be said, is the bread and butter of our white-collar work. And fraud presents itself in all different forms here in Manhattan. We have charged falsifying business records for those who violated federal bank secrecy laws. We have charged falsifying business records for those who were seeking to cover up sex crimes. And we have brought this charge for those who committed tax violations. At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. I'll now take questions.
So we're going to take a limited number of questions. There are no follow-up questions. One question per reporter. I will call on you. And again, we have limited time. Thank you. First question will be right here. Why now?
We conducted a thorough and rigorous investigation, as we're known to do, at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've been doing this for 24 years and am no stranger to rigorous, complex investigations. I bring cases when they're ready. Having now conducted a rigorous, thorough investigation, the case was ready to be brought, and it was brought.
Mr. Bryant, the indictment says that there were 34 false business records. And they would never conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming perhaps that they might be election related. I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were also broken.
All right. So let me say as an initial matter that the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits.
But why weren't there no crimes charged? How can we charge those crimes?
Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
You had expressed a year ago that you had some reservations about the case's readiness. Can you talk to us about what were some of the questions in your mind that needed to be answered in order to bring a case to this manner?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. So as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
It's Brad Garrett Hake with NBC News. Your predecessor took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Federal prosecutors took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Do you believe you have new evidence that led you to decide to charge this, or why now?
Well, as I just mentioned, we have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. And as to your part of your question about the federal, we have a distinct and strong, I would say profound independent interest in New York State. This is the business capital of the world. We regularly do cases involving false business statements. The bedrock, in fact, the basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records. I'm not going to go beyond the plain language statement of facts, which I think speaks for itself.
Just difficult to hear the questions.
So the charge is falsifying business records. The charge requires, as I specified, criminal conduct that was concealed. One of the concealed crimes we allege is New York State election law. I sort of went through in our statement of facts, which I think many of you have in front of you, goes through things including text messages, emails, contemporaneous phone records, multiple witnesses. All of that will be, as you saw in the fall, borne out in a public courtroom in downtown Manhattan.
Again, can't hear the questions.
I'm glad you put your finger on that, because it's not just about one payment. It is 34 business records, 34 false statements in business records that were concealing criminal conduct. And the earlier question about New York State election law, when I talked about conspiracy to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. Those unlawful means, we allege, include the conduct set forth in the statement of facts, which is additional false statements separate and apart from the charged ones in AMI documents, planned false statements to taxing authorities. It is not just that one $130,000 wire payment. Thanks so much.
Wow. Unbelievable. In the overall scheme of things, what that's all about is it's just small. $130,000 in Donald Trump's world, pocket change, if that. And yet this is what they're going to try to use to take him down. And what is it really? It's not even like he was trying to, if their accusations are even truthful and accurate, if their assessments of this is as they say it is, what is it? It isn't Donald Trump trying to cheat the system to get rich. It isn't Donald Trump trying to cheat the system to evade taxes. If, in the worst case scenario, what they say is accurate, it's Donald Trump just calling a payment something other than what it might have been, a reimbursement to a lawyer instead of calling it a payment to someone who is accusing him or was going to maybe try to blackmail him, or if there even was an affair or a sexual encounter, then it's money to keep somebody quiet about that. And they called it a reimbursement instead of a direct payment. And they're going to use that. You think back to all of the indiscretions that other presidents have had. Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, even JFK. There was a womanizer for you. And this is what they're doing to Donald Trump over this. This is the state, the police state, at the direction of the Democrats and probably the neocons and the military-industrial complex, going after a man and digging and digging and digging until they could find a crime that they thought they could make fit. And in this case, they're tailoring the crime to try to make it fit. And in order to manufacture consent with the public, they're going way out of their way to manipulate the media, censor the media. I would say that in itself is maybe not technically criminal, but morally corrupt and criminal. If it isn't criminal, it should be. They just put Right Side Broadcasting Network, which is obviously pro-Trump, on a 7-day ban on YouTube, just as Trump was going in for his arraignment today. I'm actually surprised that RSBN hasn't been shut down earlier. They banned Donald Trump off YouTube, Facebook, to shut him up, to try to prevent him from spreading his message or getting his message out to the public. And they have been allowing, since his electoral defeat, they've been allowing RSBN to actually broadcast his rallies. But we got to strike. We had our channel taken down at one point because we were running Trump rallies. So they came after us, but they let RSBN continue. And now, because of what they are characterizing as election misinformation, they're on a 7-day ban. So RSBN is over on Rumble, but not on YouTube tonight. So what comes next? Donald Trump is on Truth Social, his own social media platform, and he's using that tonight to get his message out. And he says that at 8:15 p.m., he will be making a statement from Mar-a-Lago in Florida. So he's getting the heck out of Dodge, or in this case, New York. And I don't blame him. I couldn't get out of there fast enough either. For a guy who used to be loved and respected in the Big Apple, for a guy who got that ice rink all finished when nobody else could get the job done, they have a strange way of showing their appreciation in New York. But that comes down, I think, to a lot of media manipulation, messaging. We were talking about mind control. Don't kid yourself, man. I've been talking to you guys about that for months here. And I believe we are all subjected to it all the time, 24/7. And I think it is so sophisticated today that we are all being controlled to some degree or another, in particular through social media. And most people are completely oblivious. They have no idea that they are being subjected to it. And even when they think, a lot of people think they're aware, and therefore they think they are immune. No. Nope. They're still coming at you. Anyway, that's an aside. Donald Trump expected to make a statement in Mar-a-Lago in, well, just a little less than an hour now. So maybe we'll be able to pick up that for you. He is supposed to speak, so we'll monitor that situation. Ron Jubinville set to join us as well to talk about flags, the use of flags at the municipal building in my hometown of Chatham, Kent. And it's an issue that may seem like it's local, but it's actually something that applies to every municipality across Canada and the US. And the issue, I think you'll find very interesting. I think you'll want to stick around for that because it's all about discrimination, fair play, special interest groups. I'm eager to get Rhonda's perspective on this because she's spearheading an initiative to make a change to the policy in her town. And what happens here, I think it could actually have an impact on what happens in towns across North America. So don't go away. We're going to take a short break. And then when we come back, we're going to show you how Cian Bexte put the mayor of Calgary on the spot today. Cian is with the Counter Signal media outlet, independent journalist. Asked a question of the Calgary mayor that quite literally left her speechless. Don't go away.
The New World Order. Government overreach. The Great Reset. Mainstream media lies. Now more than ever, independent voices are needed. Donate now at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. Maverick News. The antivirus program for your mind.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom.
Okay, I'm back. So, out in Calgary yesterday, we told you about a stabbing spree involving an assailant. 4 people, 3 of them stabbed, 1 of them assaulted. And this comes as concerns about rising crime rates in Calgary are escalating. So a man was taken into custody yesterday, multiple people injured, at least 3 people stabbed, a 4th assaulted. It was all part of an attempted robbery amid a spurt of violence in downtown Calgary. It all started around 12:45 in the afternoon with 1 stabbing on 7th Avenue and 4th Street. The victim then transported to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries around 1:10 p.m. So just moments later, police arrested a man at the intersection of 8th Avenue Southeast and 4th Street following a confrontation with officers. Police saying that at least 3 people were stabbed and another was assaulted, while the man that they arrested was trying to steal, allegedly steal their purse in the areas between 600 block of 5th Avenue Southwest and 400 block of 4th and 5th Avenue Southwest. The victims received a range of injuries from minor to serious. They're all in stable condition. But that violence has people worried. So today, the Premier of Alberta was in Calgary and announced new steps to curb the violence, new funding for police. But as part of that news conference, the mayor of Calgary also was there, and Cian Bexte from the Counter Signal was on hand and asked a question of the mayor, and this is how it went. And I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this. This was special.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. We do have a lot of questions. I ask that you line up through the mic so everybody can hear you. One question, one follow-up. Please, your name and your outlet. I do have to go to the phones at some point, so we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Go ahead.
Question for Mayor Gondek, Cian with the Counter Signal. Just a few months ago, a handful of months ago, you were fighting tooth and nail against increasing the police budget, and you were actively supporting defund the police rhetoric. I'm just wondering, when you realized that police forces were not optional, did it take, the random stabbings, wives getting stabbed, police officers getting killed, to realize that it was important to fund police departments? And how can Calgarians trust you when you flip-flop on basic issues like public safety? I guess I could ask a follow-up to Premier Smith. You talked about the bail reforms. Do you speak with the federal government at all about self-defense laws and things like pepper spray being illegal? Do you think that the federal government needs to step?
So that's how that went. If for those of you just listening to the podcast with no video, the mayor, Jody Gondek, she was standing, walked up to the podium. He finished asking the question. She stood there for a moment and then just turned and walked back to where she was standing before without answering the question. Literally, no answer. Speechless. Now, she would probably tell you that the reason she did that was because she didn't want to answer a question from some far-right nut job journalist. In reality, I don't think she had an answer. She didn't have anything for him. Because honestly, no excuse. Defund the police. First time I heard that coming from BLM, I just thought that is the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard. And I'll stand by that even today. I think that whole idea is absurd. You might need social programs to commingle with police programs and policing. Maybe you need some of that, but I don't think we need less police. Personally, I think we need good policing and adequate policing, and they need proper funding, and they need to be community-based, community-oriented. Today, the Premier announcing more funding in Alberta, Canada.
All right, thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister of Public Safety, Mike Ellis, Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Nick Milliken, Calgary's Mayor, Jody Gondek, and the Chiefs of Calgary and Edmonton Police Services, Chief Mark Neufeld and Chief Dale McPhee. It's important that everyone knows that we're all united in our belief that our policing priorities match the safety needs of Albertans. Almost every day, Albertans are waking up to news that someone in their city has been attacked or murdered. These are people's daughters and sons, parents, friends, and loved ones. Enough is enough. Violence in Edmonton and Calgary is getting worse, fueled by drugs, illegal weapons, and the federal revolving door bail policy of catch and release. 26 homicides were committed in the last 2 years by people on arrest or on release after arrest in Edmonton alone. Serious crimes like robbery and assaults are rising. In Edmonton, the average crime severity index in the downtown core has increased by 29% between July and December of last year. And people are increasingly afraid, especially in downtown cores and on public transit. A recent Ipsos poll showed that 1 in 4 Canadians don't feel safe on public transit. We refuse to let this situation stand. When we see violence showing its face so fragrantly on a daily basis, when something as essential as public transit becomes a no-go zone, and when entire communities live in fear, a red line has been crossed. The province is prepared to do whatever it takes to restore our cities to safety. Our province has a world-leading approach to addictions and mental health treatment, and we're here for any Albertan trapped in a deadly and destructive spiral of addiction. All Albertans can heal and reach their full potential, and we will be there to help them do so. But no matter what the root cause, we will not compromise on security for all Calgarians and Edmontonians. We will not allow our cities to follow the path of Los Angeles and San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, or Vancouver. Albertans deserve better. Calgarians deserve better than a 46% increase in criminal activity on their C-train stations that instills fear in law-abiding citizens. Edmontonians deserve better than a 75% increase in violent criminal activity on LRT and transit stations. And on this, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the men and women of the Calgary and Edmonton Police Services. So we are responding. I'm told that the most immediate response to making people safe, block by block, transit station by transit station, community by community, is putting more boots on the ground. And that's why I've directed my ministers to work with the cabinet colleagues and the mayors to train and recruit an additional 100 police officers whose sole duty will be to patrol streets and ensure that people are protected. Our government has also been empowering dozens more sheriffs and peace officers to begin getting things back on track. And we're committed to doing even more. The number one job of all governments is to keep the streets safe and protect people. There is no higher priority. I was relieved to see yesterday's announcement by the City of Calgary to address safety concerns on the transit system to ensure that people feel confident going to work or getting to their appointments. And I want to thank Mayor Gondek for these actions. Albertans have a right to take public transit without fear. So our government will also be providing $5 million in grants to each of Calgary and Edmonton to clean up the transit stations of debris and garbage. Calgary is doing their part, the province is doing our part, and it's time the federal government did their part. The time for delay is over, and it's time the federal government and the system of catch and release plaguing our communities and reform Canada's bail system. Voices across Canada are growing stronger, demanding change from the federal government. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police has requested an urgent meeting with Canada's premiers. We will work with them to support and invest in our frontline officers and continue to keep our communities safe. Momentum for change is building. We will not let up. Albertans will feel safe again, and we'll do whatever it takes to ensure that they do. I would now like to invite Minister Mike Ellis to share more information. Thank you.
Well, I don't think we need to go down that road too much further. You've got the story and the highlight with the mayor of Calgary walking away from the podium rather than answering Cian Bexte's question. And here's some breaking news from the Western Journal. Breaking reports: Court of Appeals awards Trump over $600,000 in Stormy Daniels' defamation suit. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reportedly has ordered adult film star Stormy Daniels to pay former President Donald Trump an additional $121,000 in attorney fees today. That amount was on top of the over $500,000 the court has already directed her to pay, according to Trump attorney Harmeet Dillon. And in quotation marks, congratulations to President Trump on this final attorney fee victory. In his favor this morning, collectively, our firm obtained over $600,000 in attorney fees awards in his favor in the meritless litigation initiated by Stormy Daniels, Dillon tweeted. Trump's son, Eric Trump, also tweeted, the Ninth Circuit just awarded Trump $121,960.56 in attorney fees from Stormy Daniels' order just released. This, in addition to the roughly $500,000 she already owes him. Isn't that interesting? Now, would that have any impact on this case? I don't think so. Well, maybe. No. Why? Because the charges are about falsifying business records. Those funds have already been paid. So the merit of another legal matter and this case, the outcome of this case, even if it suggests that there was no, well, I don't know. I suppose you could argue. I don't know what that means. I have to give that a lot more thought. It's getting complicated. This is lawfare at the highest level. And you know why it's lawfare at the highest level? Because it's so stupid. Because it's all about legal wrangling and mumbo jumbo and twisting and turning the law to use it for a purpose that it was never intended to be used for, which is to go after a former president for political purposes as we head into an election. It's an attempt to interfere with a presidential election, the process. It's an attempt to interfere with it. That's what it is. That should be a crime. That should absolutely be a crime, in my view. It would be okay to pursue a legal matter, but you would have to really, if I don't know exactly how to handle it, but it seems to me that any prosecutor, any district attorney, anybody that uses the law to try to manipulate or influence the political process with, excuse the pun, but trumped up charges, there should be some sort of a penalty for that. There probably is. The difficulty is proving that that's what the motivation behind the charges truly is. Got to think about this one more. It always gets more complicated when things get really dumb. Isn't that strange? But it's true. Absolutely true. You know what else is really hard to swallow? When people make statements about people being killed that are beyond distasteful. I was shocked, absolutely shocked today to come across, and I hope I can find it for you. Yes, here it is here. For those of you who don't know who Bob Rae is, he's a former Premier of Ontario, Canadian politician. I always thought he was, pretty smart, New Democrat, pretty woke, pretty darn woke. Anyway, he's something of a statesman. He's received some appointments over the years. He's a Canadian diplomat. He's the current Canadian ambassador to the United Nations. And he commented on the death of a journalist. Remember yesterday we talked about that explosion, and it was this journalist Tatarsky. They had a sculpture, a bust of him delivered to a cafe where he was speaking, and it was loaded with explosives. It blew up. He was killed It was a bloody scene. And then what do we get from our Canadian ambassador to the United Nations? We get this. Let me just backtrack here. First, here's the reaction. Okay, so here's Dmitry Polyansky, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, interviewed on this program, by the way, who tweeted this. He said, here is a blatant example of a Canadian official supporting a terrorist attack against a Russian citizen, blogger, and renowned journalist. Canadian freedom of speech at its best. Canadian diplomats are either non-existent or shameless warmongers and Russophobes. And this was in response to this comment from Bob Ray, who was talking about the death of Tatarsky. And what did Bob Ray say? Because he was not a journalist. He was a vitriolic propagandist, a spreader of hate and misinformation with a criminal record. Russian journalists are either in exile or in jail. And that was in response to this post from Russia at the United Nations. We heard no reaction to the assassination of journalist Tatarsky from the international community, the UN, or journalist organizations. There is selectiveness when assessing what happened to journalists here and there. They'd have commented if it had not been a Russian journalist. You may not agree with what a journalist writes, and you may not even view a journalist as a journalist. You might view them as a propagandist because maybe they do take a particular stance on issues like the war in Ukraine. But I would say that Bob Ray's comments were heartless, cold, beyond distasteful, thoughtless. I honestly never expected something like that from him. I've always had, honestly, a lot of respect for Bob Ray. In my years working in mainstream media and television, I had many opportunities to cover stories, news events where Bob Ray would show up, especially when he was the Premier of Ontario. He wasn't Premier for very long. After he was elected, his own supporters sort of turned on him. The unions turned on him because he wasn't able to deliver the pay increases and the other goodies that they were demanding of him, because he had to face political realities. And that meant coming up with a budget that actually worked. And since the province can't actually just print its own money, he was constrained. But not so constrained today that he was a little loose with his lips, or maybe with his keyboard, in my view. Disappointing. Disappointed in Bob Ray. I've always found him to be fair, balanced, thoughtful, a true statesman, very intelligent. But in this case, yeah, I know there's a war on. But that's even more reason to come to the defense of journalists, to try to protect them, and to condemn any kind of attack. And especially something like this, where a journalist or blogger, or however you want to characterize them, where they were targeted and murdered. Again, you can sign our petition to protect journalists at maverickpetitions.com, maverickpetitions.com. We launched that petition in response to a hit list that has been published online with literally thousands of names, political activists, artists, and journalists in Ukraine, naming specific people and making it very clear that they have been targeted for elimination. Some of those people on that list have actually been killed. There's another one. Why do I fear that the day our petition is actually delivered, it will simply be dismissed by people like Bob Ray, who would be one of the people receiving it. Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. Regardless, at the right time, we will take that petition and we will forward it to the former Premier of Ontario and the current Canadian ambassador to the UN, Bob Ray, and other Canadian and US politicians, calling on them to support journalists working in Ukraine and Russia and really elsewhere, all the way around the world, to help protect them in the face of attacks like this. Maverickpetitions.com. Let's send it to Bob Ray and Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden. Let's send it to the military-industrial complex and to the warmongers and to the people who maybe still have some sense of decency and can actually do something to put pressure on the government in Ukraine to have that hit list taken down. Help us out. Doesn't cost you a thing. Go to maverickpetitions.com, read what the petition is all about, and if you agree with it, sign it. If you don't, that's okay. For us, it's all about free speech and a free media. That's what we stand for here. That's what we're fighting for every day. Don't go away. More coming up right after this.
The New World Order. Government overreach. The Great Reset. Mainstream media lies. Now more than ever, independent voices are needed. Donate now at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. Maverick News. The antivirus program for your mind.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Surrounded Jubenville will be here very shortly. I hope, I think, I'm pretty sure. But before we get to her, we've got some, well, you know what? We're going to be going to Trump, I think, too, at 8:15 or shortly thereafter. And before we do that, right now, where are we going? To Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where JT, Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, is speaking at the Canada-US Summit.
Good evening, everyone. Just know it's been a big day. A lot of great and very meaty and significant conversations, but I'm warning you, settle in, get comfortable, get your translators out, because I got a lot to say tonight. Je veux commencer, évidemment, par remercier le Regia Group et BMO Groupe Financier de m'avoir invité et d'avoir organisé la conversation d'un peu plus tôt avec le ministre Champagne et le sénateur Coons. Je tiens aussi à remercier les gens présents ce soir. Vous êtes ici pour discuter des grandes questions qui touchent le Canada et les États-Unis en tant que partenaires commerciaux et alliés les plus proches du monde. C'est important d'avoir ces conversations à un moment aussi décisif de notre histoire. With global inflation exacerbated by Russia's illegal war, people in developed economies are struggling to make ends meet. People in the global south are facing food shortages. People are suffering everywhere from the impacts of climate change. And in Ukraine, people are losing their lives in the fight for their freedoms and for ours. Our relationship with the United States has always been important. But today, in the face of such uncertainty, it's absolutely vital. And President Biden made clear the depth and strength of this relationship when he addressed the House of Commons just the other day. He said, the United States chooses to link our future with Canada because we know that we'll find no better partner. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. No more reliable ally, no more steady friend. Together, we have built a partnership that is an incredible advantage to both our nations. See, over the last 2 centuries, we've built a robust and integrated economy with reliable supply chains that have supported manufacturing jobs, resource jobs, transport jobs, jobs in almost every sector of the economy. Le Canada et les États-Unis entretiennent depuis longtemps une relation qui favorise notre prospérité commune. Aujourd'hui, face à l'évolution du contexte mondial, on doit réfléchir à la suite des choses. La pandémie et l'invasion illégale de l'Ukraine par la Russie ont exposé des vulnérabilités importantes dans les chaînes
Coming up very shortly,
d'approvisionnement
Donald
mondiales.
Trump speaking in Mar-a-Lago.
Il y a de l'inquiétude par rapport à nos vulnérabilités économiques en ce qui concerne la dépendance à l'égard d'États autoritaires. Tout ce que le Canada et les États-Unis ont accompli jusqu'à présent, c'est la base sur laquelle on va bâtir l'économie forte,
Hard to say what he's gonna,
équitable,
what he'll
et
talk about. He's
durable.
been told by the judge to, I guess,
21e
refrain from saying anything that would incite anything.
The budget we
violence.
released last week was all about meeting this moment. It's a Made in Canada plan to invest in people today and making life affordable in healthcare and dental care, and to create great jobs and prosperity for the decades to come. It hones in on 2 key issues that lie ahead. The first is seizing the opportunities of the clean economy. Major economies are moving towards net zero at an unprecedented pace. They are retooling, reskilling workers, and taking real action to fight climate change. Pendant trop longtemps, les gens ont cru que la protection de l'environnement nuisait à la croissance économique. Mais le monde s'est réveillé. Il y a des milliers de milliards de dollars en capital privé prêts à être investis dans une économie mondiale propre. C'est quelque chose que notre gouvernement avait déjà compris en 2015. On a mis un prix sur la pollution, ce qui pousse le marché à trouver des solutions. On a investi
And on
dans
social media, I'm seeing many
énergétique,
posts
les
from
technologies propres
conservative
et la décarbonisation de l'industrie.
influencers who are saying, you can't gag
A
us
healthy
all.
environment is absolutely imperative if we want to continue to generate the kind of prosperity that has made Canada strong for the last 155 years, and it's where private capital is going. Canada needs innovative financing to crowd in this capital. And that's where our new Canada Growth Fund comes in. This $15 billion arm's-length public investment vehicle will be delivered by the Public Sector Pension Investment Board, who will make independent investment decisions. The Growth Fund will help clean tech companies scale up, provide project financing for the adoption of new technologies, and use investment instruments like contracts for difference that make carbon pricing even more predictable. This is something industry has been asking for, and this will help de-risk
free money.
long-term projects and provide more
They've been
certainty
asking for free
as
money,
businesses make
and I
investments
decided to
reduce
give
their
it to my
emissions
friends.
and stay competitive. The Canada Growth Fund will attract private investment in projects that capitalize on our potential. The US's Inflation Reduction Act is a historic investment in fighting climate change on a scale heretofore unseen.
It has nothing to do
It's
with inflation.
motivating clean investment across the globe,
makes
which
it
is
worse.
especially important as countries look to move away from fossil fuels produced by countries like Russia. And this brings us to the second key issue this year's budget takes on. Global economies are seeking stable trading partners and reliable supply chains in the face of geopolitical uncertainty.
Then stop going
On
to
doit
war.
tous reconnaître que les politiques économiques sont aussi des politiques de
Wars
sécurité,
tend to
qui sont aussi
disrupt
des
supply
politiques
chains.
climatiques. Notre gouvernement s'assure que le Canada soit très bien placé pour
Imagine if
être
they had taken
le
all the money that
fournisseur
they're spending on
d'énergie
the war
fiable dont le
and they
monde
invested it
carboneutre
in,
aura besoin.
you know,
On
building
investit dans
things
l'hydrogène propre, la biomasse
to
et les
improve people's
biocarburants.
lives.
Et on vient de proposer un crédit d'impôt à l'investissement
What a
dans
concept.
l'électricité propre.
Instead
La
of
mesure
blowing
va
stuff
agir
up,
comme un incitatif
build new
fiscal
stuff.
remboursable de 15% pour les investissements en énergie solaire,
Instead of
marémotrice, nucléaire et
shooting
hydroélectrique, dans les projets de stockage de l'électricité.
shells with depleted
bien d'autres.
uranium into tanks,
L'électricité produite au Canada est déjà parmi les plus
you could spend
propres
money to
au
actually
monde.
clean up the environment.
Le crédit d'impôt va permettre d'accélérer nos
There's
efforts
a
pour mettre en place un
novel
réseau
idea.
entièrement carboneutre d'ici 2025. Pardon,
Just a
2035.
thought.
25, j'ambitionnais un petit peu. Ça veut dire que nos maisons, nos bureaux et nos usines vont être alimentés par de l'énergie sans émission. Le crédit va aussi permettre au Canada d'être compétitif dans un monde
You know, they still
carboneutre
have all
où
those rodents on the
l'électricité sans
walls.
émission
24
va être
Sussex just
un
intruders
gros
home.
avantage économique. New investments to build clean industry do so on a foundation of proven, effective policies like the price on pollution. And they are supplemented by the work of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, as well as by targeted grants where needed. We're also introducing a
Grants, that's
30%
free money.
refundable tax credit for clean tech manufacturing. This could help projects that help extract and refine critical minerals, build a solar panel factory, or help a company retool a plant to manufacture clean tech. Tax credits like these are hat tricks. They cut pollution here at home, they boost production of clean exports that the world is looking for, and they support the jobs that grow the middle class and, by extension, our economy.
And make my friends much
Jobs in
wealthier.
a clean economy are what this is all about.
And lining the
Give you a
pockets
real-world
of
example
liberal
from
supporters
just west of here, on the shores of Lake Ontario.
with grants.
I want you to think of the Dofasco plant in Hamilton. Those of you from around here have probably driven by it on the QEW more times than you can count. For generations, there's been a proud blue-collar tradition of steelmaking in Hamilton. The steel forged at Dofasco has been used to construct bridges, buildings, cars, and more. Well, our government saw the future coming and realized that the existing and heavy-emitting coal-fired technology could put the jobs and the legacy of Canadian steelmaking at risk. So 2 years ago, we launched the Net Zero Accelerator to help industries like steel decarbonize and make investments at the scale needed. In July 2021, we partnered with the parent company ArcelorMittal to invest in new electric arc technology. This means that not only will Canada produce some of the cleanest steel in the world in the coming years, but our second and third generation steel workers in Hamilton will know that their children and grandchildren will be fifth, sixth, and seventh generations of good middle-class jobs at Dofasco if they choose. And that's what it's all about. A good job where people can do a good day's work, support their families, and take pride in what they do. It's why we fought to make sure that the Inflation Reduction Act included a carve-in for Canada that protected the integrated supply chains for electric vehicles. Because again, back when we were designing our climate plan, we saw which direction the automotive industry was going. We set zero-emission vehicle sales targets. We created purchase incentives for Canadians. We started building a charging network from coast to coast to coast. And now we're securing manufacturing capacity, from mining critical minerals to battery manufacturing to vehicle assembly to the specialized tires that electric vehicles roll on, made at the Bridgewater plant that Michelin has had for 50 years in Nova Scotia. We've been making sure Canadian workers and Canadian industry stay competitive, that Canada remains an attractive place to do business. And that's what our Made in Canada plan is all about. Let me tell you, the momentum is pretty darn good. In the past year, Honda, General Motors, and Stellantis have made major investments to upgrade and retool their assembly plants so that they can manufacture hybrid and electric vehicles. We've seen major investments in battery manufacturing, from Umicore, BASF, and most recently, an announcement that Volkswagen has chosen Canada for its very first overseas electric vehicle battery gigafactory. Yeah. François Philippe's a big fan of that one. You worked very hard on that. This new Volkswagen factory is a major win for Canada and a vote of confidence in Canadian competitiveness. Our government worked hard to get this deal, but ultimately, it was the reputation and strength of Canadian workers that sealed it. In all my conversations around the world, in pitching Canada, in telling people to come invest in Canada, the greatest competitive advantage we have is always our workers. Hardworking, innovating, showing up for work, steady, well-educated, with healthcare, with strong communities, with great quality of life, a growing population. These are the things that draw people in. Remember last year I was at a Nokia announcement in Canada.
Okay, we're going to pull out of that. Enough of JT. You got the gist. Hang on. More ahead.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out. of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
This Friday, April 7th at 6 p.m. on Maverick News, we will be hosting a health conference to help you and people like Cindy Young.
What I'm experiencing.
For more information on Friday's health conference, visit mavericknews.ca. Click on the contact page.
These are happening more often.
And send us a message. Or tune in Friday, April 7th, 6 p.m. on the Maverick News channel. I don't think I need to tell you what happened to Cindy. Let's bring Rhonda in. She has arrived. Hello, my friend. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you, Rick?
I am just fine, thank you. I appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Interesting story with you again, making some progress down there in your new position as a counselor on with Chatham-Kent City Council, our hometown. Tell me what's going on with these flags.
So I'll start with a little bit of history. So when I say we, the municipal council and mayor received an email a couple weeks ago. So first of all, just to set the tone, in front of our civic center and our different municipal centers across our municipality, because it's quite geographically vast, we have different centers and we have flagpoles out front of the different municipal centers. And so we have different flag raisings, which I'm sure you've all heard about, different movements, different organizations, they request to raise their flag. Could be, IODE, it could be Crime Stoppers, it could be Truth and Reconciliation, Black History Month, Pride, those are a couple examples. So a couple weeks ago, an organization sent an email into council and the mayor and requested if they could have their flag flown. They've never had their flag flown before, and they requested if they could have it flown in May, any given amount of time, and the request went unanswered. So a couple of us, of the counselors, myself and three other counselors chimed in and gave our personal thoughts on the organization. And, three of us thought it was a great idea. And one of us was actually quite rude and unkind in his response. And then we found out from our CAO that the flag, the flag decisions of how they are risen, or who is allowed to have their flag risen or not risen, is a unilateral decision of the Chatham-Kent mayor. So he makes the decision. There's no policy, there's no protocol, there's no criteria. He just decides if he would like it or not. So with that being said, the organization never did hear back from the mayor, and they reached out to me. I did ask them, I said, let me know if you hear back from him. And it was about 2.5 weeks ago, and they did not hear back from him. So I take an unanswer as a no. I'm going to be safe in saying that was his way of saying no. So with that being said, I am all about democracy and fairness and equity and inclusion. I'm using all their buzzwords. And I made the motion last night that Chatham-Kent will only fly the Canadian national flag, the Ontario provincial flag, and the Chatham-Kent municipal flag in front of all of our municipal buildings. There will be no other flags allowed to be raised in front of any of our buildings. So I tabled the motion. It will not be voted on until April 24th. And I'm not quite sure how it will go. We have a very, our council is, it's very liberal and strong, liberal and NDP strong. So I'm chiming in, or I'm not chiming in. I'm just reading a lot of comments on social media on all the different news outlets that have reported it. So I have a lot of support, but then I have a lot of people that think I'm, a terrible person for making this motion. So I guess we'll find out on April 24th what the rest of the council thinks of my motion.
Well, I have to say I'm sort of in agreement with you, because it's the sort of thing where if you're going to do it for one organization, you pretty much have to do it for all. And if you're going to say no to some, then you should probably just say no to all, because that's the only way to really be fair.
Well, and I know a lot of institutions, some schools, some corporations have kind of adopted that policy. They'll fly the Canadian flag, or perhaps their own flag, but they will not indulge other flags. So I did speak to a media reporter today, and I said, aside from this, he was really trying to back me into a corner and saying, well, that's not fair. Do you really think what you're doing is fair? And I said, well, do you think it's fair to decline one organization because perhaps someone on council, the mayor or other councillors, don't agree or subscribe to their ideology? So, for example, I don't subscribe to certain ideologies, but yet that flag is flown at Civic Center, and I don't subscribe to it. So how does this work? It's okay if the liberal media subscribes to it or the liberal councillors subscribe to it, but it's not okay if a conservative or a councillor doesn't subscribe to it. Like, how does that work? Explain this to me. So I just thought, what, the whole flag, raising the flags, I think it's almost gotten out of hand. It's losing what it once did. So I just thought, rather than raising a flag every day or every other day or once a week. Why don't we just focus on other things and just leave our flags there, the Canadian, the provincial, and the municipal flag? But a lot of people obviously think that's a bad thing, which I find really perplexing, but I don't know. But there are people that agree with me. So,
I see the value in trying to draw attention to a good cause, charities, community groups, whatever. But in the absence of a policy that administers fairness, I agree with you. You have to just kind of say, we're not going to do that then, because
right.
Especially if you're leaving the decision up to the mayor who makes an arbitrary decision. That's not fair.
No, I don't think it is. And I think it's just how it's been all these years. No one's questioned it. No one's challenged it.
Yep.
So, I mean, and I would be open to a policy if that was presented, but I don't really know how, I don't know how we would develop a policy that would, have a meeting of the minds that we could all agree on the criteria. Basically, the CAO, when he answered, he said, we can't support flags that spread hatred or vitriol or violence, which I completely agree with. We can't have an F Trudeau flag flying out front. Sure. I get that. I respect that. But, if you're going to say yes to one, you say yes to all of them. So, and we have to represent everybody in our municipality. And if we can't, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
So,
and this might seem like a local issue, but it stretches beyond Chatham-Kent, because this is the kind of issue that you're seeing in every municipality, in every community. A lot of communities do flag raisings like this, where they'll raise the flag of a charity or a community group, or in some cases, political groups. And a lot of these groups that are community-based also have political agendas or political affiliations, if you will. And it's also, I mean, this is what we're seeing even in the NHL right now, right? With hockey players being asked to wear pride colors, and some people don't want to do that. And these are ongoing issues, but I think that you've hit the nail right on the head, and you've clearly struck a nerve.
I think we just need to say no and just get back. And that's what I said today. Let's just get back to the basics. It's really getting out of hand, really. I mean, I almost feel like everywhere I look, and don't get me wrong, I respect people, but everywhere I look, there's rainbows.
Yeah.
It's just, sometimes I don't know. I just want to see normal things. I don't want to see rainbows everywhere I look.
I just want the city to pick up my garbage and make sure that their potholes are filled in, and
I know.
Just stuff like that. Like, I keep saying that. All the rest of it, the municipality is there to deliver services.
That's right. Yes.
Like sewers, make sure the sewers are taken care of. Make sure you've got your landfills operating properly. Those are the important. Are the bridges fixed and safe?
Look after our roads, and provide policing, provide fire, and just make sure all of that is looked after. And all of these little things, sometimes it's kind of like the flag has been, or the flag pole, I should say, has been hijacked. And let's just get back to the basics. That's kind of what I'm going on. So,
well, I appreciate you coming in here tonight. I know you're a little outnumbered, I think, still over there at City Hall, but you're a trendsetter, I think, and you are the tip of the spear, because you've ventured in there, you got yourself elected, you're making a difference, you're providing balance on council with I think it's fair to say, a more conservative voice, and I think that's a positive thing, because I think that that's needed over there. A little bit of balance.
It is. And there are some other, I have kind of found who my allies are on council. But I agree with you where I think we might be a little bit outnumbered. But even if, I mean, if my motion fails, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But I will have some words when I present it, when it's actually voted on, just to let them know exactly what if they do vote against it, what exactly they are voting against. So, and I told the media today when he interviewed me, I said, he said, so is this it? Like, this is it? You're done? Like, this is your motion and that's it? I said, no, I'm open-minded. I'm common sense. I'm a pragmatic thinker. I'm not a dictator. I'm not a totalitarian, but I'm a Democrat. Like I have democratic principles. So we have to be fair to everybody. We have to be equal to everybody, not just this select group of, the where the narrative is right now. We can't just pick that one. We have to pick the one maybe where the narrative isn't right now. So I don't know. I just think we have to start speaking up against some of this and bring awareness. And I don't know. It seems like it's getting out of hand. So
yes. Well, we have Donald Trump is in the building, and he's going to speak at Mar-a-Lago.